And continuing behind the news this afternoon here on WBAI, it's 5:35, and of course remind you that at 6 o'clock you could hear a report of today's news, and we invite you to stay tuned for that. And we'll continue our program today. We're now going to a segment actually taken from a symposium which was held at the Bethany Baptist Church in Brooklyn last week, Tuesday I believe it was. It was a meeting of legal activists from the African American community. I could see a meeting, more like a clash in many ways, but arising from that was, I thought, some remarkable presentations, one of which I thought stood out. And I thought it would be appropriate, given what's happening here, what's happening around the world, given the people who's making decisions about our lives, that we should introduce a talk given by Clayton Jones, who's an attorney. He was instrumental in the Stewart case. Many of you may recall that. In fact, it was a turning point on looking at the question of police brutality relative to the African American community. He has worked on many international issues. He's lived in France. He's worked on Liberia. I remember he did quite a bit of work in Liberia, and I believe he now lives in the southern part of the United States. I guess pursuing the same old agenda, seeking peace and justice for the African American community. Let's hear from him as he speaks about what's going on in the community now on the heels of the assassination of Amadou Diallo. Clayton Jones.
When I was asked by Alton Maddox to come to New York to participate in this discussion with some of the nation's most distinguished and cultivated legal minds, I was reminded of the mongrel who registered at the Madison Square Garden annual dog show and was queried regarding the rationale for his appearance among the finest dogs in the nation. His answer reflected the same feelings that I had when Alton extended the invitation. To wit, both I and the mongrel are, and clearly were, out of our depths. Yet, like the mongrel at the dog show, I felt in accepting the invitation that the exposure would be good for me. 20 years ago, in 1979, I found myself in a similar situation on the Upper West Side of New York. In that case, I had agreed to appear on a panel to discuss the racial situation in America, only to learn after the publicity had been circulated that the real topic for discussion that afternoon was to be the criminal justice system in New York. Judge Wright, along with Judge Donald Covington and your current controller, H. Carl McCall, were members of the panel on that occasion. After apologizing for being there and explaining that my ignorance of the criminal law was defined by my inability to distinguish a misdemeanor from a felony, in a vain attempt to cover my obvious inadequacies, I immediately commenced a scathing critique of the subject, criminal justice, suggesting, among other things, that the juxtaposition of the words criminal and justice within the context of a viciously racist society constituted a study in self-contradiction, more appropriate to a discussion by a panel of logicians rather than lawyers and judges. After 20 years, I am constrained to confess that the quality of my knowledge of criminal law has not improved. During my years as a lawyer, I studiously avoided contact with the criminal courts except in cases of extreme necessity, and almost always either as a spectator or a behind-the-scenes manipulator. The philosophical justification for my reticence to practice before the criminal bar involved a strong distaste for participating in and perpetuating the illusion of a criminal process based on justice, when at bottom the system is hardly more than a farce, designed primarily for the purpose of eliminating the African male as a factor in the liberation of his people. The criminal justice process in this nation is irredeemably illegitimate and shall remain so for so long as the principal object of its process is the young African male. This lawyer is temperamentally as well as philosophically unsuited to participate in that process. As my contracts professor Grant Gilmore wrote in his Ages of American Law, "In heaven there will be no law, and the lion shall lie down with the lamb. In hell there will be nothing but law, and due process will be meticulously observed." I have spent the last 35 years observing the rise of fascism in the city and state of New York. During that period, I have observed a steady increase in the intensity and scope of the atrocities committed against the people of color in this city and state. I have yet to observe the African policeman either singly, in a mob, or as a member of an avowed death squad to whom the night belongs, execute a single white in cold blood. I would ask that you not applaud. I'm running out of time. It also occurs to me that there is no record in the Berlin of the 1930s of Jewish atrocities against the Germans. I am also reminded that just as the Africans of New York, in the face of death squad activities sanctioned and encouraged by a fascist government, continue to depend upon the judicial system for justice, even when history clearly provides no evidence in support thereof, the Jewish middle class in Germany tended to look the other way when the Germans came for the gypsies, the feeble-minded, the lame, and the less affluent Jews. As I said in the discussion of the criminal justice system which was held on the Upper West Side of Manhattan 20 years ago, quote, "In a racist society, each of us chooses his own method of survival. Some choose insanity. These are the walking dead who wear I Love New York buttons and who sing with feeling God Bless America and who put their hands to their chests when they sing the Star-Spangled Banner. They sincerely believe as they attend their testimonial dinners and boat rides and discotheques that to be a trustee in this concentration camp called America is tantamount to being free," unquote. Just as the bourgeois Jew of 1930s Berlin saw the decimation of the poor Jew as an aberration in a system which was fundamentally rational, so does the Negro trustee in the New York of the 1990s view the execution of a young African by a death squad of the New York City Police Department as an aberration, having nothing to do with the life or lifestyle of the trustee class. What the bourgeois Jew did not understand until it was too late was that the oppression of the less fortunate Jew was merely a test case to determine the threshold of Jewish tolerance for racial atrocities. What the trustee class of New York City does not appear to have grasped is that the execution of Diallo is perhaps the final test of the resolve of the African population of the nation's largest city to resist terror at the hands of a fascist state. It is not accidental that your mayor, within days of the most recent crime by New York's finest, announced the introduction of hollow-nosed bullets into the arsenal of the New York death squads. The tepid, if not timid, response to terror by the Africans of New York sends the desired signal to all the fascist forces of America. The message is clear. The Negroes have lost the will to resist. This is hardly the time for prayer vigils, and symbolic rallies organized and led by would-be politicians and ambulance chasers, vigils and rallies calculated solely to divert the attention of the black masses from the reality of life and death in a fascist state. The current tactics are the direct result of a failure of intellect on the part of the leaders and of those who follow the leaders of these so-called protests. It is a failure to understand the difference between cause and effect, which said failure produces inevitably the further failure to develop a rational strategy to eliminate the root cause of the death of a young African male gunned down by a fascist death squad consisting of 4 mafia rejects acting under the aegis of their fascist handlers. It is a failure to understand the difference between an isolated act of murder and a war crime. The actions of the death squad represent a logical consequence of a system of laws based on race and not on justice. A system which presumes a state of war between the New York City Police Department and the African population of this city. A war in which the murder of a young African male is hardly more than a statistic in an estimate of collateral damage. Does not your mayor cite the decrease in crime statistics in New York City in the same news conference in which he expresses his condolences to the family of the murder victim, and within hours therefrom announces the introduction of hollow-nosed bullets into the arsenal of his vaunted death squads? It is therefore to the system, a system predicated on the presumption of a continuous state of warfare, that our outrage must be directed. If the Africans of New York are in fact under siege, the question is clear. Where are the Negro politicians, preachers, community activists, and intellectuals, and what are they doing and saying? Why have they not descended in mass on the office of the Bronx District Attorney and demanded the immediate indictment and arrest of the members of the death squad? Why have they not marched on the city council and on the mayor's office and sat there until the entire apparatus of the tactical patrol force, which spawns the sociopaths who participate in the death squads, is dismantled, sociopath by sociopath? Why have they not marched on the office of the police commissioner to demand on what basis he continues to keep these murderers on active duty and still armed to the teeth? The people have a right to know the statutory and regulatory bases of these obscenities. Where are the thousands who ringed the construction site of the downstate medical center in the 1960s, and the preachers who lay down in front of cement trucks and went to jail simply for the right of our people to a decent job? Where are the young lawyers who sat in at the Board of Education in the early 1980s and who almost went to jail along with their clients in order to secure a quality education for our children? Where are the hundreds who stormed the World Trade Center and the governor's office and sat in on Cuomo until he agreed to meet with the parents of the murdered Michael Stewart? How long will the Africans of New York abide by this plethora of crimes against humanity? I would suggest to you that such crimes will escalate for so long as we fail to understand the fundamental difference between politics and protest, or more precisely put, the difference between a race leader and a Negro politician. At the risk of quoting myself again, I would remind you of my admonition to the Africans of New York 24 years ago. In an op-ed piece for the Amsterdam News, I began with the following statement, quote, "At the 1975 annual banquet of the Congressional Black Caucus, Mr. Vernon Jordan informed us that black politicians are now the leaders of the race." This writer views that pronouncement with profound concern, if not alarm. Its uncritical acceptance poses, in my opinion, a fundamental threat to the future of black people in America. I ended the piece as follows. The political process is not conducive to the production of leaders. The politician, whether black or non-black, is concerned principally with his personal survival in office. His financial support is of dubious origin. His principles are compromised on a daily basis in the face of political reality. He is obsessed with process at the expense of product. He is, in most cases, a minor tactician and not a master strategist. And in most cases, he is dismally unaware of the long-term consequences of his actions. In a word, he is a rather dangerous individual who on any given day might inadvertently and without malice sell a whole race or nation down the river and then scratch his head and wonder what went wrong. The race cannot afford such leaders. Better that we have no leaders at all. As my brother, Dr. William Augustus Jones, Jr., the pastor of this church, has put it so well, where the sound of the trumpet is required, the flute will not suffice. From among those who have taken the lead so far in responding to this most recent act of official terror, one discerns only the faint chords of the flute. One hopes that there still remains among the Africans of this city a remnant of trumpeters who have an understanding of the times to know what the children of Africa ought to do. Let me close with the words from my speech of 20 years ago on the Upper West Side. The lives of the trumpeters among us are fraught with danger. Assassination is not uncommon. Maximum security detention is almost certain. The struggle will be long, hard, and bloody. The trustees among us will betray us at every turn. The guards will become increasingly brutal and cruel. As the maximum security wards overflow, increased reliance upon psychosurgery as a cheap alternative to detention in maximum security will become commonplace. At that point, I would suggest to you that the guards will make no distinctions between different classes of Africans. We shall be as the Japanese in World War II on the West Coast, or as the Jews in Germany who went to their ovens believing to the end that they were German and singing Deutschland über alles. Let us hope that we Africans shall not go to our deaths singing the Star-Spangled Banner under the insane delusion that we are in fact Americans.
And you were listening to excerpts from a talk given by attorney Clayton Jones, who was part of a meeting of legal activists from New York City. Actually, not from New York City, from across the country, since he lives in Kentucky, I believe now, and then Chokwe Lumumba was also on the program. And he, too, is from the southern parts of the United States. Also, Alton Maddox was on there, I believe. Of course, a number of other persons. The program was actually chaired by Utrice Lead. Also, Michael Tarif Warren was there, and I believe the Reverend Al was also there. A number of people met at the Bethany Baptist Church, but I thought Clayton Jones's talk was particularly interesting, and I thought we could maybe offer that for you for examination on today on this program on WBAI.